early in my career, I actually did have a boss who presented business partnering to me as,
Mm-hmm.
in finance, you have the facts and the data. You can share the data with the business, and then you leave it up to them to make the decision. And, that might have been true sort of 20, 30 years ago, but, we've come a long way since then. And
Right.
actually today, the business wants your opinion, and you actually have to be there driving the business decisions to help govern the business.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Optimize Show brought to you by Spendflo. I'm your host for the episode today. My name is Adhyuth and I am the Global Director of Procurement Operations at Spendflo. For all the ones who are joining us for the first time and tuning in for the first time, Spendflo is a unified SaaS buying and management solution that enables high growth businesses to buy, renew, and manage SaaS subscriptions. Today, we have Julie Oye, who is the Vice President of FP&A at Gelato, who joins us for this episode. Gelato powers the largest print and demand network, enabling creators to access a global customer market while shipping local, saving on delivery cost, time, and reducing the carbon footprint. So, Julie, welcome to the show. But before we begin, just a quick question. What's new in London apart from the rains?
Thanks for having me. So just to follow with the British tradition, the sunshine's probably new. We had a good week of sun and dryness for the last 4 or 5 days, although the rain's coming back today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Australian and I grew up by the beach down in Sydney, so I'm also
Awesome.
obsessed with the weather.
Awesome, great. So before we tune in and get to the real business stuff in terms of decoding and also understand the strategies for supercharging performances, just a quick note for all of us who's listening to us. Could you just go ahead and introduce yourself briefly in terms of what all you have done so far? Talk about your experiences. How did your finance professional journey started, and all the organizations that you had worked in?
Yeah, so just to start from the beginning, I originally started at Macquarie Bank back in Australia in their finance department. So it's a large investment bank back there. So if it's publicly listed, I think there was a lot of emphasis on hard work, like tight deliverables, high performing teams. But also, I think the added thing that impacted me is I started during the financial crisis. So
Mm-hmm.
from day one, everything's about efficiency, cost reductions, automations. And I think a lot of that themes, that kind of permeated through my early years working there, as well as the reporting and analytics, then followed me throughout most of my career. A few years later, I moved to San Francisco and I was able to join a small company there called Pensco. It was about 100 people when I joined, a finance team of 5. And so that's when I really caught the bug for working small, kind of tech-driven companies, having that opportunity to understand everything going on in the business, be really integrated with the commercial and operations teams. Just having a full view of everything was a lot more interesting to me than working in a large company, but on a small business unit. And I was lucky enough to also be part of a deal team where we exited the company to a bank as well. After that, I moved to London. And so, like I said, I always knew I wanted to stay in the tech scene. So I joined Monzo Bank as their third finance person. It was just a
Oh.
CFO and treasurer when I joined. Yeah. It's about 100 people, 3 in finance. And Monzo had a great hyper growth journey. We went from 150 to 1,500 people in 3 years. And throughout that, finance went from 3 to about 50. We kind of built up our own engineers and data analyst team within finance as well. And so definitely learned a lot around first principles thinking and hyper growth management there. And after that journey, I really wanted to go explore early stage startups, which I hadn't done before. So I found Runa, which was about 30 people in the fintech space as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been there for about just over 4 years, growing the company from 30 to 150 people and looking after finance operations and legal. So again, that gave me just a huge breadth of perspective across the company. Yeah, so that's been most of the journey. And now I'm starting at a new role called Gelato as a VP of FP&A and looking after a lot more on strategic finance.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us so far, Julie, and congratulations on your new role. And we would definitely would want to wish you all the best for it. Yeah, I understand that, the finance department has also, significantly evolved over the years, right? But I think, for all those people who think that finance is, merely a bookkeeping or maybe a cash flow management type of a function, then I think they are deeply mistaken. And we all know that how, finance has advanced as well in its own terms of, the responsibilities that they share. But I think similarly, the tech advancements have also been, pretty in the complex business environment that we are in, I think it has typically made the finance managers, more strategic in nature, if so not already. So, as they focus on value creation and advise on, business decisions, going beyond, just the reporting of the financial data that we usually or probably any finance individual would ask for. What we would want to understand in this episode predominantly would be to discuss the complexity of building a team for yourself as a finance leader. So, previously, since you were the head of FP&A at Monzo Bank, where, you said that you scaled the team to such large heights, what was the thought process that you had, that you had to build your finance team from scratch?
So I think one of the biggest things I learned while I was at Monzo is always think about what you need 12 months ahead of time. So in a fast growing company, like when I did first start hiring at Monzo, I did make that mistake of trying to think about, okay, well, what role do I need to fill today? There's so much work going on. What skill sets do you have today? But also trying to find someone who's like curious and kind of early in their career, so therefore really hungry about the role.
Okay.
But the problem is, especially in the UK, a lot of people have 2 months notice period. They need at least 3 to 6 months to onboard and ramp. And so really you're looking at a year down the line before someone is like truly value add and independent and autonomous in their roles. Hiring to fill a role or a gap that you have today doesn't work. The company can grow beyond what that person is by the time they've ramped up. Yeah, one of the things that I think was really important is thinking about where is the company going to be in 12 months' time. It's not a given in a startup as well. If you're trying to experiment and figure things out, you don't know exactly where the company will be, but you can figure out what kind of stage it will be at, what products it's pursuing, what are the other teams doing, and then figure out what are those competencies that you need in 12 months and hire for that gap.
Wow, that's great. I mean, yeah, I can definitely resonate with what you're saying because, capacity planning definitely could be one of the most important aspects of it, where you kind of, look beyond and see that, okay, how are you going to manage your capacity in that sense? So I think that's great. But, here again, one of the other questions also that I had for you is that, me also having a very similar experience with a startup and which is in Spendflo. One of the things that we do is that, we kind of get senior professionals, and as well as we also get, juniors in the industry who are like just starting out their careers. So a curious question is that how do you strike the balance between, hiring the experienced professionals and nurturing young talents within the finance team?
Yeah, very common issue as well. So the way I think about it is, again, depending on your business, what industry you're in and the complexities of the product, think about the requirements that finance has to provide the business that is just very clear cut. It can't get wrong. And in those cases, you probably need someone with experience. So typically I've thought about areas that are, in finance more about financial control, or, I come from mainly a fintech background. So if you're facing off against regulators or you need to be audited, then there's probably a finance leadership role there around the controllership that's pretty critical to have the right amount of experience in. Those will typically also face off with your product teams or your commercial teams. So having someone who does know literally what the requirements are so they can be built correctly from day one will just save you loads of headache down the line. So I think those are typically the kind of roles that I find important to have someone experienced in. And then outside of that, if you're having, slightly more kind of junior to mid-level roles or even manager roles, that's where I would aim to nurture talent, or get someone who doesn't have the exact experience, as long as they have the curiosity and resilience to learn. And that way you also structure the team so that the more senior people are there with the experience to guide and manage and coach the junior people. And the junior people actually have someone that they can learn from and get some structure in their learning, despite the fact that startups are obviously very unstructured.
Right. Interesting. So, it's great that you strike the right balance in terms of what the senior professionals would do and how they would, kind of manage the work for the other people as well in the team, with that team coordination. But this also, again brings to an interesting question that with all of the different types of people that you have in your team, have you ever observed, any competency gaps that you might have in your team? Because I'm sure that the dependency in terms of the responsibilities that your team might have. So have you, in your personal experience, observed any recurring competency gaps that, your senior management or probably the C-suite leaders could strategically address to enhance the overall team effectiveness? So, I mean, if you have encountered any of those, issues in your own, personal experience, would you mind sharing some of the steps that you had initiated for cross-functional collaboration within teams?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the important thing I think to always remember is in startups, nobody's done the job exactly the same before. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone's figuring it out for the first time and, no one gets it perfect. So I think one element is just kind of keeping that empathy in mind as you're working across teams. All your colleagues are also just trying to figure out what to do. So a couple of the things that we have done to enable more cross collaboration, and the reality is finance, like many other support teams, will often get left behind or not thought about because rightly
Right.
so, the company is very customer focused in the early days. So there's a couple of things that I've done in the past, which is one, literally just insert yourself into those product and commercial meetings. So it's okay that, a product manager has loads to think about. It's honestly quite amazing how much information they keep in their head at any one time. So you can't expect them to know all of the internal stakeholder needs right off the bat. So there's
Absolutely.
been times actually when I've just looked at product manager meeting calendars. And if I
Mm-hmm.
see they've got stand-ups going and launch meetings or planning meetings going on, literally just popped up in the meeting. So if you're there, you're hearing what's going on, you start to contribute to what they need to think about, you're
Right.
catching it early on. And actually, I found a lot of the times the product managers were quite grateful that you did just appear and contributed your thoughts so that they could think about it early rather than later down the line. So that was one element, and one thing that I kind of asked my team members to do as well, is like, you have the buy-in of senior management to do it. And so just
Right.
go ahead and make sure you're there where the business is. And then the second thing, just to make it a bit more structured, was actually to implement the process around it.
Mm-hmm.
So, at a certain stage, we've put in like governance checklists or commercialization checklists where, whether it's commercial or product, if something's about to go live, there is an internal stakeholder checklist they have to go through to make sure that not just finance, but all teams have been considered and agree with the phasing of the rollouts. And so this puts a bit of structure behind it, but also
Mm-hmm.
just means, you can't build everything day one in a startup. So if something can't be catered for and can't be built, at least there's a common understanding and explicit awareness about that,
Mm-hmm.
rather than, one of the internal teams being caught by surprise down the line.
Awesome. I mean, I understand that there's going to be a lot of, support and, a lot of guidance that, your team would also require. So, beyond building all these strong teams and, having these leadership roles within the finance department, extend to the responsibility of mentoring and providing direction to associates from junior professionals, right? So let's consider the flip side of it, right? How can probably a financial executive such as yourself, who's a VP of finance, or maybe a CFO, could leverage their professional networks to cultivate strong mentorship relationships? So the aspect why I'm asking is that, have mentors kind of played a significant role in your own career development, and what advice would you have to offer to young professionals seeking to establish such relationships in their own professional journeys?
Yeah, for sure. And I think actually they've become more important for me later in my career than even in the beginning, partly because in early stages of your career, things can be quite structured. There's a lot of natural learnings you're going to get from your managers and the people around you. And later in my career, especially my time at Runa, I was the finance leader and there wasn't anyone in the company for me to speak to. So actually, that's where I invested more time to network.
Okay.
Um, Luckily, there's quite a few great, very close-knit finance leader networks in London around startup finance leaders. And so we're able to speak quite freely with each other. There's a lot of events that go on, where we can discuss topics relevant to us within finance, and you find a peer group. But yeah, besides that, there's a couple of mentors that I keep close in touch with. And so I know if I ever need anything, just give them a call or a text, and they're always there to offer support, not just technically, but emotional support as well.
That's great. So, Julie, again, one question in the same lines also is that I know that earlier, you had mentioned that you were one of the early joiners at Monzo Bank, and you kind of helped to scale the team, right? So I'm sure that, times are also changing, and you're looking as more and more, women employees are joining the finance industry, right? So do you have any strong words of wisdom for all these young women who are navigating the finance workforce?
Yeah, so definitely there's been many times, I think, especially as you get more senior in your career, that you might be the only female in the room, unfortunately. personally myself as well, I've always been very introverted, just growing up culturally, I was
Mm-hmm.
taught not to speak unless you're spoken to. And so developing my voice has been a huge part of my focus over the last few years. And
Mm-hmm.
I think as a part of that, really just focusing on the problem that the company is trying to solve and almost forgetting about gender has helped, to be honest. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if that might come off a bit controversial, but when I'm in that room, I'm just trying to think about what's the problem we're trying to solve, what are the facts that I can bring to the table, and then
Mm-hmm.
what's the recommendation that I have. And so if
Right.
you align the facts and a bit of opinion, present your case, I think that often helps people to just engage in the discussion and
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily focus about your gender or other traits as much. Fortunately, I've generally been in companies and teams that are highly respectful of these things. So, even if there's times when you've occasionally been dismissed or overlooked, I've actually been able to be in a situation where I could kind of pull the person to the side after a meeting and just address them to say, it wasn't great when you kind of spoke over me or interrupted me. And the other person's been able to take that into consideration and, try to improve going forward. So I think I've been very lucky in that sense. But I would also just say if you're ever in a company where you're completely overlooked and disrespected
Mm-hmm.
structurally in that company and you've voiced your concerns and they're not listening to you, I'd honestly just recommend someone to go find somewhere else to work. There's no point wasting your talent in a place where it's not going to be
Absolutely.
respected. Yeah.
Well said. I think again, wonderful insights, Julie. I think this has been pretty insightful. So I first of all would want to thank you for joining us today. I think it has been an absolute pleasure to host you and listen to your insights on building teams that are sustainable and especially your tips for all those encouraging tips for the young professionals and for everyone who's aspiring an opportunity to, or probably who's aspiring to make it big in the finance industry or the finance function. Your insights to them are like absolute gold, I would say. So thank you again for sharing those insights and talking to us and being on this episode. I'm sure all the listeners who have tuned into us would have learned a lot from your experiences, Julie. And I think, with that, it would also help them and work through the startups and as a woman in finance in particular as well, because the way that you had encouraged all these young professionals, especially the new women professionals who are like, willing to make a career, I think all your tips are going to be absolutely amazing to them. So for all of our listeners, whoever would want to connect with Julie and who would want to continue on the conversation with her, you can check out the episode description for her LinkedIn link and any additional resources that might have mentioned. Until next time, I'd say stay informed, stay inspired, and keep thriving in your financial journey. So thank you for tuning in.